I'm not saying the state doesn't need the money, and I'm not saying they don't pay severance tax elsewhere, but there's precious little of that tax will come back to Center County or Elk County or Jefferson County that would be used to finance the courthouses and the sheriff's department, that protect the ownership of this property, that file the records, that build the roads and bridges that these trucks use, that impact the schools that supposedly will be training people to work in this industry. That money won't be coming here if it's not a property tax. It'll go to Harrisburg. The first formula has precious little of it coming here. You know, I lost my hair and got gray watching Harrisburg change formulas over time. They used to pay for a lot more of school districts too, and that's changed over time. And what happens is once that income flow goes in one place, it's going to be awful hard to break it back out. And so we can only emphasize the importance of being upfront in this game as quickly as possible.
So the severance tax is something different.
Yes.
If the state wants to do that,
yeah,
that's primarily for the state. But this is property tax, and the money would come back to the counties, the municipalities, and the school districts.
That's correct.
And it's not an either or. You know, most states have both. But
it's a matter of setting the right rates. But
right now, it appears that Harrisburg, the folks are talking strictly about a severance tax.
I can tell you that the proposal to implement or to restore the property tax is part of the platform of the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, and it has been since 2002. There are probably other municipal associations that support that. Dan, I know you work with a group. So I guess I'm going to wrap this up and then turn it over to the media for questions. As recommended by the Center County Natural Gas Task Force to the Center County Commissioners, I make a motion that the county support the restoration of the property tax on oil and gas in Pennsylvania. Any second?
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Point of clarification, we need to add it to the agenda first.
Okay, would you like to make that motion to add it to the agenda?
That'll be fine. I'll make the motion to add it to the agenda.
I will second that.
Okay, all in favor of adding it to the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. I guess I will, would you like me to restate the motion?
No, it's fine.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion.
I just want to say we haven't sat idly by. We have sent support letters in the past as well, Dan. So I mean, Center County has tried in the past and as well. We'll continue to.
And I appreciate that.
So.
No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved. We're going to do things a little bit differently. I know our guests have to go, so we're going to allow the media to ask their questions at this time. Stephanie, can you get your microphones out to the...
thanks.
Mr. Kern, you talked about data and expertise. Just last week, or within the last 2 weeks, Penn State updated a study they did a year ago on this. Projected 220,000 new jobs, billions of revenue. Also, in their conclusions, these oil companies are already paying a lot of impact taxes and local taxes, and no new taxes are needed. So who are we to believe? It seems like we have dueling experts.
Well, they're not paying any taxes any different than any other industry pays, but they're paying a lot less than any other industry. What's happened is as a result of this court case in 2002, they have been exempted from the taxes that every other industry pays in the state. And it seems a rather specious argument to say that they are so special that they shouldn't have to pay tax when coal pays tax, limestone pays tax, Walmart pays tax. They all generate businesses and employees too. Their factories pay tax, a car factory pays tax. We all pay taxes in the state. We live in a state that relies heavily on property tax. And what we've essentially done with that court case is we've said that we've created the new sacred cow in this state called oil and gas. Now, we've made it the same as churches, hospitals, and government institutions. And it seems to me that that just is not the way to operate, number one. Number two, they're not paying their fair share of taxes when it comes to all the activities that they use. Number three, we have a state constitution that requires that when we do taxation, we do it fairly and equitably. And essentially, we've said we're going to do it as fairly and equitably as we can, except oil and gas. If one wants to argue that our taxes are too high, well then, Gary, your taxes are too high, my taxes are too high, Walmart's taxes are too high. I'd like an exception too. I just hired 3 employees in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to hire another one. Does that get me a property tax exception? No. Walmart just hired employees when they build a store. Does that get them a property tax exception? No. The oil and gas industry in Pennsylvania is operating at a higher level of profit in terms of the gas that they can put into the pipeline than they are in Texas. And they pay their taxes in Texas and somehow have made billionaires out of some of their owners. So it seems to me that it's time to get serious about treating all the industries fairly.
One of the arguments you hear is that if you impose these taxes, the natural gas industry will dry up. But from what you've said here today, these companies are here to stay, are they not?
Yes.
And is that fear-mongering to say that they would disappear?
Yes. The gas is here. They could go to New Jersey where they don't tax gas, but there's no gas there. They could go, where else are they going to go? Back to Texas? They pay taxes there. North Dakota? They pay taxes there. Wyoming? They pay taxes there. In Wyoming, the oil and gas industry is over half the state's budget and nearly all of the local school district and municipal budgets. Or they could go to Alaska, where there's so much bonus paid in taxes and royalty fees that they write checks to all the residents. They're still drilling there, and they want to drill more there. These folks will go where the gas and the oil is, and where they can do it most profitably, certainly. But given the relative position of Pennsylvania, it just seems foolhardy to continue to grant them an exemption from the taxes we all pay, and they pay in every other state. To say they have to have their taxes removed to drill in Pennsylvania is to say that we must be the worst state to drill in, we must have the highest expenses to drill in, and we must sell the gas for a lower amount. Conversely, it's the opposite of that. We're closer to where they buy the gas, and the gas they're getting out of the ground is almost always pipeline grade, so there's a lot of expenses they get to avoid. So this is a good place to drill gas. There's a lot of gas here. The ownership is already fairly well established. The pipelines are already being constructed and already being planned. So this is not a place where it's marginal. Now, we've been argued there are some marginal properties that they might not drill. Probably. But there are 50 to 100 years worth of properties to be drilled in the state. So if you take some marginal properties out, now we're talking 48 to 96 years worth of properties to be drilled in the state. We're not looking at imposing a tax that would be severe.
Mr. Fisher, how much money is the district losing out on with not being able to impose a real estate tax on these natural gas operations?
A conservative estimate would be, and I think in 2010, somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million, which would go primarily to lower residents' tax bills. That's how the legislation would read. So the district really is not only losing that in terms of revenue for the district, but essentially the taxpayers in the district are funding their free ride, the oil and gas folks.
Are you seeing any type of spike with wage taxes because of these employees who've moved in here, set up shop in your district, and has that made much of a difference?
It has. We've seen some employment, limited, but I visited one of the sites about a year ago, and I think just about every license plate I saw there was from Texas. I read, I guess it was in a Center Daily Times article, that people were filling up hotels locally or motels locally. And even those taxes, because they stay there longer than a month, the room taxes, those taxes that the county would normally collect, are not applicable. The income tax, the earned income, is not taxed. That obviously goes out of state. So we have not seen very much additional revenue in our district at all.
When you look at the map of the Marcellus, where the activity is, somebody mentioned it's very rural areas. Those look like school districts, very rural, that Could use about every dollar they get hold of, too.
There are many school districts north of I-80 that are just like Bald Eagle area. They cover large expanses, and they have very few traffic lights, and they have very limited amounts of taxable property. So it's a big issue. It's a big issue for Bald Eagle area. It's a big issue for more than 200 school districts that have less than the average income potential that other school districts enjoy.
Realistically, how far away are you from getting this tax back on the books? And I mean, are you going to every county that we saw in that shaded area and doing this? I mean, what needs to happen? I think that this is an important step, but does it really do anything else than, you know, kind of give you guys support on paper?
I made a presentation in Potter County just 2 weeks ago to their task force. It's going to take a lot of folks to do that. I don't think it's impossible, but it's something that we need to do collectively, and we just can't ignore it. It's too big to ignore. It was too big to ignore before, but with the Marcellus play, it's criminal to ignore it.
Any idea though when the earliest you, in your mind, you could start getting this money?
Last year, Representative Hanna told me that they could actually move it in the House. House Bill 10 could move if they could get some indication that it would go someplace in the Senate. But last year, nobody was even talking, I don't think productively, about any tax on them, on the gas folks. I think that discussion is happening now, and hopefully this discussion with property tax can be incorporated into that discussion. I think there's more hope now, but it is urgent that it doesn't pass us by.
House Bill 10 was approved by the House last year, and no action in the Senate.
Right. It never got out of the finance or the committee.
I think
the House did not approve it.
And
2 years before that, the House had a bill that they couldn't get out. And essentially, the lobbying efforts were so successful that these folks just did not move it.
House Bill 10 takes care of one of the objections that many folks had, which was it basically gives a sketch of how to do the calculations. And it requires specific data to be supplied, but it also does another key element, which was a lot of people said this is going to be a windfall for certain counties who are going to be able to collect all kinds of money. So written into the bill was if reimposing the tax that was around for 100 years puts these counties or school districts or townships at a real windfall advantage that year, they had to lower the tax rate on everybody. So essentially this is tax reform. This is saying to the homeowner and the farmer and everybody else, if we tax this, your rate would be lowered. Everyone's levy rate, the calculated rate that taxes would be lowered such that the county or school district would stay relatively even from the year before. Now, that doesn't promise taxes don't go up in subsequent years, but what it does is it makes it brings us back to 2002, so we had an even playing field. It just redistributed the tax burden to everyone who would have paid it in 2002.
Jeff, you mentioned some of the collateral damage caused by this. It's rough on the roads, water concerns. Are these companies being good citizens and trying to make amends for some of the damage that they're doing?
In some cases, some of them are. In some cases, some of them aren't. It's a case-by-case basis. Now, and that's an interesting point. If I volunteer to be a good citizen, we can all pat me on the back, and I'm a happy camper, and we're all happy. But if one day I decide not to be a good citizen anymore, and I haven't been paying taxes, the county's stuck. A good citizen calls up a school district and says, we'd like to make a donation in lieu of the taxes that we would have paid you. Sounds wonderful. Except the taxes would have been $200,000 and the donation's $5,000. Well, it sounds really nice, but it doesn't make up for the lost revenue that's now being imposed on other taxpayers. I think that's the key element here. Bald Eagle School District or Phillipsburg School District or any one of the Bradford, Susquehanna County areas, they still have teachers, they still have libraries, they still have sports teams, they still have buildings with heat and lights and everything else. Those taxes are now going to people who are not making millions on oil and gas. So essentially we've said the people who have the highest end, most productive industry in the state